So now, in thinking about when you graduated from SAIS, tell us about your career and how that all evolved.
My career has been quite a zigzag career path, but it goes back actually to my time in Peace Corps in Brazil and to SAIS, where first in Peace Corps where I got interested in development, and then at SAIS where I deepened and solidified my interest in development. But as I went, I became more and more interested in particular in the role of the private sector as a catalyst for growth and development in developing countries. I can't quite explain how that happened, but it became the focus. But when I got out of SAIS, I really wasn't skilled enough to get the kind of job I wanted in development. My dream job when I came to SAIS when I left was to go to work for the International Finance Corporation of the World Bank, because that was the private sector arm of the World Bank, and that's really what I wanted to do long term. And but I wasn't qualified. And SAIS didn't make me qualified because back in the day there was no finance program, which is what I teach now. So there was only traditional economics, and people that came out of SAIS had no financial analytical skills whatsoever, and were not competitive in that world. So to make a long story short, my first job out of SAIS was at McKinsey & Company. If I wasn't the first graduate to go to McKinsey, I was one of the first, and it was a fantastic experience.
How long were you there?
I was there a couple of years, and I'll tell you why I left in a minute. But I basically, that was my business school. I learned an enormous amount of it. I to this day have an enormous regard for McKinsey. They were very good to me, and they sent me to Brazil. I did the very first engagement that McKinsey ever did in Latin America or Brazil, as a junior associate. And the only reason I was selected for that engagement, which was a pioneering assignment for them, was because I spoke Portuguese. And I, at the time, was the only person in McKinsey worldwide who really spoke Portuguese. So they had no choice. They had to send me with this very senior team. And that ended up being groundbreaking for McKinsey. They ended up opening an office and so forth. But anyway, during my second year at McKinsey, one day the phone rang, and it was Dean Francis Wilcox from SAIS. And he said that the assistant dean who was in charge of admissions and career services, was leaving very suddenly to go work for Henry Kissinger in the White House and the National Security Council. I was at this time 27 or 28 years old, and Dean Wilcox, who I knew very well because I had been a real rabble-rouser as president of the student government when I was a student, asked me if I wanted to come and work at SAIS, which was a real stunner. And so, to make a long story short, I accepted his gracious offer at half the salary I was making at McKinsey, no less. And I decided to come back to SAIS and at the same time to get my doctorate. That was part of the deal, although I had to go through the admissions process and so forth. So for the next 5 years, I had what became George Kroll's job and then Bonnie Wilson's job. George Kroll, by the way, I hired first. I recruited him to come to SAIS. I then hired him as an intern when I was in that job, and eventually hired him as my replacement when I left 5 years later. So I knew George very, very well and had a very high regard for him. He was at Antioch when I recruited him to come to SAIS. And I spent 5 years here getting my doctorate, and at that time, when the administration of SAIS was about a tenth the size it is today, I did with Dean Osgood. It was first Francis Wilcox was the dean, then it was Robert Osgood, who was a real father figure to me, who was my dissertation advisor and a very, very close friend then and forever after until he passed away. But I basically was in charge of admissions, student affairs. I oversaw a lot of the business operations, so I did everything. Bob Osgood and I ran the school. And it was great fun, and I worked like 24/7, but it was a terrific, terrific job. So I came back to SAIS as a dean. And then I wanted to, though, get back to what I wanted to do. And I was still not qualified to do what I really wanted to do, which was to go to work at the International Finance Corporation. So I wangled myself into Salomon Brothers, which was what I did when I left here, not knowing really the difference at that time between a stock and a bond. really starting from scratch. And I learned finance on the trading floor of Salomon Brothers, and this was the late 70s, early 80s, or late 70s. And long story short, that got me to the IFC eventually. I was there for about 3 years, learned all about finance, and at the same time I convinced SAIS to teach the very first course ever in financial markets. What I learned on the trading floor, not in a classroom, at Salomon Brothers, I then used to teach the first course at SAIS in international financial markets, which was the embryo for what became 20 years later the finance program. That's a different story. So anyway, I was at Salomon Brothers and I finally got an offer from the IFC, and I went to the IFC at the World Bank and spent the next 12 years there, all over the world, working in what I had hoped I would do. I had a 2-year leave to teach and do research at Harvard, the Kennedy School. I had a joint appointment at the Kennedy School and the Business School where I was working on privatization in developing countries, which was also very interesting. And then at the end of that time, I privatized myself. I like to say that I was really, really privileged to work at IFC. I really liked it. I learned enormous amounts. It was a very exciting part of my career, and I was really glad to leave when I did, for a variety of reasons. And I went, first I became a partner at KPMG, and was in charge of their global privatization practice out of Washington. I was on a plane probably 60–70% of the time all over the world. And I didn't particularly enjoy that lifestyle, but I was there for 4 or 5 years, built up a big practice of privatization in developing countries. And that was the time when the Berlin Wall came down, so I spent an enormous amount of time building a practice in the former Soviet Union, all the republics of the former Soviet Union, Eastern Central Europe. It was a very heady time, and I was in just the right place at the right time, doing privatization. We didn't do a particularly good job, but I was on the ground in these countries, really a witness to history, had a front row seat. A very, very interesting period. And then I went into private equity in New York. I wanted to get out of that because I was doing, for lots of reasons, and I went to work as a partner in a New York private equity firm, Patrickhoff and Company, Alan Patrickhoff, where I worked with another colleague who I had first known at IFC to build up an emerging markets private equity practice. And I was in the midst of doing that when the phone rang again, and it was another dean. This time it was Paul Wolfowitz, who at this point was ready to, and it really had been a 20-year process of starting a real finance program at SAIS, which was very, very exciting. This is what I had felt was important for SAIS for years and years and years. And slowly, I was always through this period an adjunct at SAIS, and I would teach courses when I was working full-time, first coming down from New York, and then I always kept my connection with SAIS, teaching different courses in international finance, financial markets, and gradually the program started to take shape. But it was Paul Wolfowitz who really had to, I think, struggle with a lot of resistance internally to start a real program in international finance. And that was the genesis of what is today the largest program at SAIS. And so again, I took a very substantial salary cut to come back to SAIS. It's part of the pattern of my career. So I left the world of private equity, came here in January of 1999 to start a completely different career in mid-career. And I've never looked back, and I must say this is the 15th year, and it's definitely the most rewarding part of my career. Having been at SAIS for these last 15 years, I have nothing but great things to say about it. It's been the best thing that ever happened to me. I've been privileged and fortunate to have a lot of very exciting jobs, challenges, gone all over the world, done very exciting things, but what I've done at SAIS these last 15 years really is the crowning, I don't know if it's achievement, but I would consider it the most interesting and rewarding part of my career.
That's great. And to follow that, and thinking about current students today and your maybe 3 evolving careers, what advice might you have for them?
I don't think that I have advice for students. I tell people all the time, students spend a lot of time in my office asking that question. And I say the following always. They come to me not so much because of my towering intellect, but because I've had all these different careers. And so I'm one of the few people now at SAIS in the full-time faculty that comes as a practitioner. And I think that I wish SAIS had more people with practical experience on the full-time faculty. But it's hard to find people that have the combination of academic credentials and practical experience. But I feel very, very strongly that it comes down to what I call know thyself, that no one from the outside, not your parents, not your girlfriend, boyfriend, professor, can tell you what to do. You have to look inside yourself, and you have to be brutally honest with yourself about who you are, what you like, what you're good at, what you're not. And you can talk to different people and they can give you advice, but nobody can tell you what you should do. You have to decide that. Indeed, I tell students all the time, maybe you shouldn't even be here. But you have to be very introspective and really dig deep into yourself and ask this question, who am I and what do I like and how do I want to spend my life? And I can't tell you that.
All right, well, thanks so much for your time today.